Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Revel 11. I'm Monica Smith, a co-creator of Revel 11, along with Joni Parsons, who's been talking.
Good morning, everyone.
She's my bestie.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, we're a community where we try to inspire each other to be our best selves, as well as to be the change we want to see in the world. Even though that sounds pretty lofty, we also just like exploring cool topics and having fun too. But being outdoors in nature is a way I know I'm inspired to be my best self. And I'm guessing all of you are also inspired by nature. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here to learn from our special guest, Suzanne Simard. If you haven't already, I encourage you to read this. It is so good. It is both a beautiful personal story and also a wonderful education about the nature of trees and interconnectedness that I'm sure all humans could really benefit from right now. It's obviously a concept that resonates since Suzanne's work has inspired so many, including Hollywood. Welcome, Suzanne. We're so honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I think that it would be nice to start with some context for our audience. And even though I already sent out your bio, everyone knows your background, but help us understand your passion and work and tell us about how your childhood and early experience working in the logging industry shaped your future.
Well, I grew up in the forest, where I was always, my world, my family was always taking me and my brother and sister to the forest. We're living in the forest for the most part. And so it was just part of who we were. We didn't really have any other context to compare it to. And of course, my family was a Quebecois family who had migrated across Canada in the late 1800s and settled, and they were horse loggers. And that included my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my dad, all my uncles were horse loggers. And so I got to be part of all that. And it was a very, family operation, very slow and small scale. And so I saw the forest as a regenerative place where people lived in and made their livelihood from the forest without destroying it, with being sort of regenerative people. We weren't rich. We made a living, and that was good enough. And then I became a forester myself, because I loved the forest, and I started working in the industry. And what I found was completely different than what I'd learned. That by the 1970s and through and beyond, we had, as a society, converted from these small scale, family-owned logging operations to industrial logging. And that meant clear cutting great swaths of land, which we're still doing today, which, in British Columbia, where I come from, we've, in this process, I've watched through my life, of the 40 years of being a forester, my beautiful province of old growth forests that I, grew to love, to a province of clear cuts. And we're down to the last few percentage of these very beautiful, iconic old growth forests. And that's what drove me to do what I do, because I really felt we were missing something here, that we were exploiting the forest instead of caring for it. And I wanted to sort of help with that.
I can't imagine what it was like to work in the logging industry, first of all, as a woman. At what point did you quit?
I don't know if I ever really quit. I mean, I just moved around. So yeah, I started out in the actual, working for a logging company. And that was really hard because I was the first girl to work in that company. And of course I never was going to get anywhere. I did field work, which I loved. But it was really clear that they didn't really, there was definitely a wooden ceiling. You could only go so far. So I shifted courses and went back to graduate school and just, learned more, moved into government. I moved around. I tried to take opportunities as they showed up. And that turned out to be the right thing to do, I think, rather than sort of being a battering ram trying to make it through this male dominated juggernaut that wasn't going to let me in. So I just moved around like a worm.
It probably was such a great experience though, because it got you on the inside to really understand the industry and their priorities though. So as a scientist, you probably can draw on that knowledge so much.
Definitely. I mean, every one of those experiences were formative. And yeah, I mean, I learned about the industry and what drove making money in the industry. So those, the quarterly financial reports are basically what drove it. And forests lived for hundreds of years. And I saw that mismatch, what we were doing for short-term gain in forests that lived for so long, and it wasn't working. But I also saw the human side of people working in the industry and how they kind of get addicted to it, but also, they feel like they're doing the right thing for the company, or there really is a conviction that this is that they're doing good for humanity, and not really knowing, right? We didn't, I guess, I can't say we complete ignorance and apologize for it, but that is the human side of it, is raising your family and but doing it for this huge corporate entity that was growing and morphing and merging and becoming bigger than anything that anybody really knew. And now it's like, out of control.
Yeah, I think people just assumed that it was a never-ending resource that we wouldn't run out of, or that it wouldn't damage our world. It's such an interesting history. At what point did you start becoming interested in what's underneath?
Yeah, well, so as I worked in the industry and worked and started, I was fortunate in that I got to do more investigative kind of work as I moved along, and then through my graduate degrees, got to really dig into the science. But I was, I was seeing these conversion of these old growth forests, these multi-species, beautiful, complex forests that were, as I said, hundreds of years old, to these plantations that were basically monocultures of, one or two species and grown as, simple forests. And I was seeing the impacts of that disease in the forest, infestations. The trees would grow well at first, but then they would get infected with all these different things by the time they were teenagers. And I just started looking at, and one of the big things were these root pathogens. And of course, I loved soil anyway. It's a natural for me. And so I just started looking at what's going on below ground. What are we affecting below ground? And as I've, learned more and more, when you think of a forest, when you're walking in the forest, you're only seeing half of it. The above ground half is there's a mirror image below ground. There's half of the stuff is actually below ground. And it's incredibly complex and brilliant. I mean, really, that's where the action is.
That's so cool. So what is a mother tree for those who haven't read your book yet?
Yeah, so the mother trees are really simply the biggest, oldest trees in the forest. They're the elders of the forest. And the reason that I call them mother trees is because I was studying these below ground fungal webs. They're called mycorrhizal networks. And mycorrhizas are a kind of fungal association between trees and all plants, actually, except a handful of plant families. But most of the plants we see in nature are in these obligate mutualisms with these fungi, of which there are thousands of species. And these fungi take photosynthate from the tree and use that to grow their bodies, their mycelium, through the soil. And they pick up nutrients and water and deliver it back to the tree. And it turns out that a lot of these fungi, they can connect trees together. So there are a whole suites of fungal species that connects, for example, Douglas fir to other Douglas fir. There's whole suites of generalist fungi that can link Douglas fir to pine and spruce and larch and birch. And so it's this, I've discovered that the place is just highly connected, that all these trees and plants are actually connected together in this below ground world.
And weren't you the first to realize that they truly communicate?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I was the first. I was the first one to do this in forests. So there had been a study already done in the UK by a scientist, Dr. David Reed, and he worked in the lab, and he was a mycologist, so someone who studied fungi, and he had this idea that pines could be connected below ground by these fungal networks. So he made this lab study where he grew little pine seedlings for a few months and inoculated them with a single mycorrhizal fungus, and they became connected. And then he labeled one with radioactive carbon-14, was able to actually visualize this carbon-14 moving to the next seedling. And he published that lab study in Nature. And I became fascinated with that, as did many other people. But I guess I wanted to find out, did this actually happen in real forests? And was this part of the puzzle of why I was seeing, the disease in the forest? Were we breaking up these networks through our conversion of these old growth forests to plantations? And that is exactly what I did. I went into the forest and I found out, yeah, they do exist, and they're dynamic, and they're that they actually transmit information and resources back and forth between trees. And so the whole field has been, widened and visualized. And I think that, yeah, we know so much more now than we did 30 years ago, but that's how it started.
It's so exciting. There was a comment in the chat that when you were saying that there's as much going on underground as above, it was compared to an iceberg. And I think that that is such a cool comparison, because it's so true. There's as much going on below the surface. And I think it's similar to, like, we all have opposites, So I thought that was beautiful. Can you be a little bit more specific, or it's an abstract concept to think about how trees communicate, but say a tree is stressed. I know that it can communicate its distress to, say, a mother tree, but will you describe how that actually happens?
Yeah, so, and we've looked at this in many ways. So I'm I probably won't capture it all, but so these mother trees are, just going back to that idea, just the biggest, oldest trees, because they're the most highly connected trees. They have big root systems. They're huge. They have huge leaf area, huge crowns. When you look up above, the big canopy that you see, the overstory, that's where photosynthesis happens. And photosynthesis is what drives that whole below ground food web, that network below ground. And so one of the ways is if a mother tree becomes distressed, say becomes infected with something or is dying, that mother tree conveys information to the neighboring seedlings that are growing up around that tree. And so one of that pieces of information is, hey, I'm stressed, I've been infected or infested, and I want to send a warning to the offspring around me or the other trees. And those trees pick up those warning signals. I think that it's actually like the trees are transmitting actual enzymes through the soil, or at least preliminary molecules that are the preliminary substrates for making these enzymes. And then the neighboring trees pick that signal up, and they upregulate their DNA, and they start producing enzymes themselves that defend themselves against whatever that marauding agent is, that infection. The other thing that these dying mother trees do, or stressing, is that they send their remaining carbon to the network. So they transmit, they'll take, because they're constantly photosynthesizing even as they're dying, and then they actually move that carbon around in a directed way to the neighboring trees. It doesn't just, and when I say directed, it's not just like decomposition of those old trees and the CO2 goes back up into the atmosphere. It's actually delivered to these neighboring trees and seedlings to conserve the energy in that below ground system. So those are just two ways of that communication.
So if a mother tree is cut down, I guess it's part of the network that the surrounding trees start to take over and communicate, and it's just a continuing process, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so in a lot of forests, old growth forests have many ages of trees in them. There's big ancients, and then there's adults, mature trees, and there's saplings and seedlings, and so there's a dynamic the life cycle never ends. It never begins and ends, but trees do grow up and die. And then others, when an old tree dies, there's a light gap that's created, these small gaps. And there's more light, there's more soil resources. And so the seedlings that are there, that are sort of hanging out in the understory, they're released from basically sitting there in the understory, and they can sit there for literally hundreds of years with just waiting for their moment. And then the resources open it up, and then they take over and they become the mother trees themselves in time. And so the cycle just renews itself in these kinds of forests.
Incredible. Do you see a path forward for saving mother trees and avoiding clear cutting?
I do. I mean, the path forward, we're definitely still clear cutting mother trees, right? Where I come from in British Columbia, the clear cutting is the dominant harvesting method. And that's true, around the world, because we go after these big old trees because they're the most lucrative on the market. But they're also the nucleus of the forest. Now we know that they are actually, extremely important in holding these communities together, forest communities. And so what we really need to do is save the old trees, and in harvesting, if we're going to use some wood, which we need to do, to save those old trees instead of going for them, right? It's like turning it inside out. We've got to turn our thinking inside out and take the understory trees, or leave clusters of these big old trees and gaps around them, more emulating what happens naturally in some of these forests. So how do we do this? Well, it takes a lot, and thinking about, the whole industry is geared towards doing this, to clear cutting, and to change that infrastructure and that mindset is really difficult, but it's going to take, all people putting pressure on their governments to say, no, we can't do this anymore, and just to emphasize how important it is to stop doing this, is that clear cutting forests around the world is one of the primary causes of species extinctions. And it's also one of the leading causes of, next to fossil fuels and cement production, it's the leading cause of cycles back to climate change. And so it's not a trivial thing, right? It's extremely important that we change what we're doing, because we need these old forests to be carbon sinks and biodiversity hotspots.
How can we as individuals help and better protect the forest?
Yeah, so there's lots of things that can be done, at big levels and small levels. But the first thing we can do is, like, there's big companies that use old growth forests. They buy products from old growth forests, and to become aware of what those products are and say, I'm not going to buy that. If Amazon is getting cardboard from old growth forests, hey, let's put pressure on Amazon. So really linking into the markets and making choices that you're not going to do that, and then pressuring those companies to clean up their supply chain so they're not using old growth forests. And then, and in so doing, we can start, we also need these large companies and governments to start, saving these forests. I mean, we do have networks of conservation areas, but we've got to expand that, because it's not enough. What ecologists are saying is that we need like 30% intact ecosystems in order to survive into the future. I think that that's probably a minimum. But in order to do that, we've got to be starting to actually set aside this land. And how do you do that? I mean, there are market mechanisms to do that. And I think one of them is to sell carbon credits for those forests, for example. Instead of the little towns getting their livelihoods from 2x4s, is that we buy the carbon credits and then empower those communities to actually manage their forests themselves. So there are many things that we can do. Those are just two things. But as individuals too, like when people are, in my neck of the woods in BC right now, there's a whole bunch of students and elders who are protesting to defend our last bits of old growth forests, is to actually support these movements, because it really is that movement that's making the industry stand up and say, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing, as we've always done, or change the law so that it's illegal to exploit these forests. So yeah, we need to protect and support those movements that are trying to do this.
I have like 5 questions from that, and I'm going to get really overwhelmed because there were so many different elements to that. But another Monica in the audience put in the chat, and I had the same exact question. How do we find out who uses old growth forests? Like you just made a really quick comment about Amazon's boxes and where those boxes come from. And that's a great question. And I wouldn't have a clue as to how to find that information out. Is there a good resource that you could recommend?
I think that there are resources. There's an organization called canopy.org, who actually is a Canadian company. They used to be called Forest Ethics, they're an ENGO, and an environmental non-governmental organization. And their focus is on, on the marketplace and who is buying these products. So I think you could go there and you could find out what companies are doing well and which ones aren't. I think that a lot of companies don't even know where their products are coming from. And so, like if Amazon is using partial old growth forest, which I don't know, I actually don't know that. But we could, and they might not know that, but we need to find out. And once Amazon knows that they shouldn't do that, then they can start, they can start choosing the companies that they will buy from. But the public also needs to put pressure on Amazon to say, hey, we're not going to buy these products until you know and you post what your sources are. So we really need to hold this whole chain to task, right? We need to
yeah. I'm really fired up now. I want to go start asking questions. And I think that's probably true for our audience. Is one of the most important things that we can do is just start asking questions.
Yes. Exactly.
A theme that runs through the book is that of competition and cooperation. Why do you think it's such an essential question for forestry, but also just kind of like we were talking about the larger questions for business?
Yeah, so such a great question. So, we are in forestry, we've been solely focused on competition for so long, that forests are structured by competition, that, the growth of this tree depends on its neighbors and how they compete for light and water and resources. And it's driven forest practices, this idea that we want these, the big fat trees to be dominant and get rid of all the subordinate trees if they're competing. And it driving practices like how far apart we plant trees, the genetic makeup of those trees, how we treat plantations by getting rid of native plants to, with the idea that all those resources would go into the trees we want, like the Douglas fir and the spruce and so on. But this is not true, right? This is a problem. We didn't understand the full suite of relationships between plants. We totally just focused on one thing. It's like, when we're talking or when we're communicating, we can talk, but we also have visual expression, right? We have body language. It would be like only speaking and not hearing and seeing all that other expression. These trees have multiple ways of expressing themselves to their neighbors. And so cooperation is one of those ways. And so we've missed that. In all the forest management that we've done, we've missed this idea that these other plants have cooperative roles as well, that they're essential in the succession of a forest. And so in getting rid of those plants, we've actually gotten rid of the diversity of the forest. We've gotten rid of, those cooperative elements where they help each other. And so we've kind of created monoculture plantations that are really not very nice, right? They're dark, they're thick, it's hard to walk in them. There's no other plants in the understory when these plantations are young. They're just not, they're not healthy forests. And okay, for a societal comparison, I think that if, our society was just based on competition, that, it's the dominant get to the top and who cares about anybody else. That is not a very healthy model either. And I think that we do have elements of that in our society where we have segments oppressed so that, some can get, very, very wealthy. And that doesn't help society, right? We need to elevate all of society in order to have a productive society. And forests are no different.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many interesting parallels with business and personal lives. It's just incredible. this might be a little bit of a separate issue, but I think we're all pretty aware of forest fires these days. So I feel like we need to talk about it a little bit. What do you think is the best method to deal with forest fires?
Yeah, so, well, first we need to talk about the causes of these fires, and then we can talk about ways to deal with it. So the causes are multifold, but the primary cause is climate change. And so, it's heating up, rainfall distribution patterns are changing, so forests are under stress. And when we get big heat waves, like the heat domes that the West experienced this year, including where I lived, where I live, things will burn, right? Like it doesn't really matter that the forest is vulnerable or not. If you have an ignition source under those heat conditions, it burns because it's dry. There's not much moisture there. And so we have to deal with that root cause of climate change. And, fossil fuels is the primary thing. We all know that. Cement production, the second, emission of CO2 to the atmosphere. That's another thing we need to address. And then land use change is the third thing. All those things are, the three legs of the stool of climate change, and we need to address that. We need to decarbonize basically our energy sector to do that. Then from, in the forest itself, we've actually increased the vulnerability of our forested landscapes through management practices. So, climate change aside, we've suppressed fire because we thought, oh, well, we don't need fire, or we want to keep these forests preserved in the way they were, or preserve them so we can cut them down and keep the wealth for ourselves. And in suppressing fire, we actually had fuel buildups over a century, whereas our Aboriginal people of North America would burn on a regular basis and keep the fuel loads low. So we've created this, we've got the heat, we've got lots of fuel. And then the third part of this is ignition sources. So, most of our ignitions are either from humans or lightning. From the lightning side, under these very heated atmospheres with like high temperatures and fires that start, they create more lightning. And so then you get more lightning strikes and more fires starting. So around where I live, there were 300 fires burning this summer. A lot of them started from lightning that originated from existing fires and creating these mega fires. Okay, so what can we do? Well, we can go back to spring burning, which is what the Aboriginal people did in order to have, light burns that took out understory plants or trees that were kind of making thickets, which, we can do these kinds of things. And then encouraging the natural biodiversity to including the broadleaf plants, to reestablish themselves, and that protects the forest. The other thing we can do is like stop cutting down the old forest, because they actually are the most resistant to fire compared to, say, a plantation, which are extremely vulnerable. These young coniferous plantations are the most fire prone plantations of all the things we could do. So, and we have this landscape that are full of these vulnerable plantations. So we need to convert these things so that they contain a diversity of plants that are more fire resistant, more moisture in their leaves, broadleaves mixed with conifers, for example. And then we can really actually make our landscape much less vulnerable by doing those kinds of management actions.
And do you think it's worthwhile for us as individuals to help, reach out to, I don't know who it is, the Department of Interior, on a state level for doing more managed burns or advocating for that? Do you think that's worthwhile?
I think so. I definitely, one of the things I've experienced in my life in government and industry and then academia is that there will be no change unless there's pressure for change.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's easy to stay in the status quo and just continue to do exploiting the forests, and, because it's cheap. We've gone to the, we've gone to the cheapest way of managing forests. And so they'll keep doing that unless we press for change. And you can do that by writing to your elected officials and writing to your Forest Service, and getting involved and putting pressure on. And, and hopefully, it doesn't elevate to the point of big, massive protests, which is what's happening up in Canada. I think you can push as citizens, like just keep pushing, writing letters to the editor, contacting your MLAs, getting grassroots movements going to protect your own forests. Those are all really good tools to use.
I'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who signed up with some of the resources that were mentioned, like canopy.org. There was someone in the audience who asked if it's also like stand.earth, if you're familiar with that.
They're
okay.
Connected, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Together.
And then there was a question, and everyone, you can feel free to write questions as you think of them in the chat area, and hopefully that we'll have time. But I am also curious if Gail asked if you are optimistic that we can help solve our climate issues by 2030.
I think we have no choice but to be optimistic and moving forward and be present in the moment with what we have. We have incredible capacity as human beings to be innovative. We know that. We can change. Look what we did with COVID. I mean, there was a lot of resistance, but there was also a lot of people that got on board with change. And so I think we need to be open to change. And then, once people get, making the right choices or policies put in place by governments, which is even more important, which is as I said before, it's got to be pushed by people at grassroots level. But those high level policies at the national level, the state level, the international level, they all have to be put in place in order for us to get to 2030, before it's too late. And so what are those policies? Well, getting fossil fuels off the list, right? Shutting down oil and gas. I know that sounds draconian, but what's coming down the pipe is even worse. So we've got to, be decarbonizing as quickly as we can. So, going for renewable energy, put our efforts into solar energy, for example. I mean, we've got this incredible energy bombarding our earth every single day. Goodness knows we can learn how to capture that energy instead of drawing it out of the middle of the earth and polluting our atmosphere. So, we've got to put all hands on deck to figure this out. And we can do it. We need to do it. But we all have to get involved and push to get it done.
Okay, I'm really going to shift gears now and go to more personal level. Having lost a sister to breast cancer a long time ago, I was so moved by the story of your experience with breast cancer and how it influenced your work. Can you talk a little bit about how it affected your life and work?
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways. I mean, people talk about the silver lining of getting a life-threatening illness like that. And there are so many silver linings, and I experienced that. We all are in this life and we don't get out alive. So at some point in our lives, we face our mortality. And I think that, I was, in some ways, I was afraid of death like everybody and resisting the idea that I would die. And then I was confronted with it. And I had to grapple with this, my own mortality. And I'm so glad I did, because now I'm just so much better prepared. My life is, more focused on the things I think are important. I'm not afraid to be speaking out for forests, for example, and the empowerment of girls. And whereas before I was like, oh my God, somebody's going to criticize me. Forget that. You just got to move forward and do what you think is right. And then, so really, I've become much more of an advocate, I guess, for forests, because I see that time is limited. Let's get on with it. And we need good leadership as well, because in that void of leadership, somebody else will take over. So there's that. But then there was also the nitty-gritty research that I actually did when I got sick. And that was asking questions like, do these mother trees recognize their own kin, right? Do they recognize the relatedness of the seedlings growing around them, and finding out that they do? And then when these mother trees get sick, do they actually look after them? Do they transmit anything special to those kin? And they do. They send more carbon and more information to their kin than when they're, healthy and robust. At least that's what our experiment showed. And then the other question that I asked, that I'm asking right now with one of my grad students, Eva, is that tree, the yew tree that provided the medicine for me that healed my breast cancer, paclitaxel from the yew tree, does its community matter to it and its ability produce these incredible medicines. So we're growing yews with maples and old growth cedars, and seeing that they're all linked together in these networks, and that they do actually share, information and carbon, and we're trying to look at how does that affect paclitaxel production, and will it affect the quality of the medicines? And so, yeah, of course, I put my energy into figuring these things out, and it's been fun. It's been, it's a curiosity-driven research, but I think that kind of risky curiosity-driven research can really pay big dividends. In the end, we learn so much so quickly when we look. So, yeah.
Isn't it amazing that a tree, in a sense, helped save you?
Yeah, totally. Totally. And, that compound, paclitaxel, which the Aboriginal people already knew that the yew tree was a special medicinal tree. And we actually, as Western medicine, actually learned that from them, and then started testing it, and then, eventually synthesizing it in labs. Those trees actually produce these defense enzymes to protect themselves against sickness. And so it makes sense. That's the other amazing things about forests, is that, the forest is full below ground of millions of species of fungi and bacteria and archaea and nematodes. And we don't know that much about them, but this is where a lot of these medicines originate, right? Or at least they drive the cycles that support the trees that produce some of those medicines. And so I think conservation of forests, even for that purpose, so for those medicines that are there that we don't even really understand, and food plants, we need to be saving these forests for those reasons as well.
I want to acknowledge what you said about facing a life-threatening illness and how it can be a blessing. I had a brain tumor removed at the beginning of the year, and truly it's made life better. I am so thankful.
Wow.
In some weird way that I went through that experience. And similarly, it's kind of like shedding the stuff that's not important, like what people think of you, or, just understanding what the important things are in your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate that we need life-threatening illness to make us see it. So hopefully we can just share that experience and people will take that to heart.
Yeah.
I've had a few questions in the chat about the range of communication with trees and the species. Like, does one species communicate directly with others more effectively? Or can you talk just about that, and particularly the distance that they can communicate with each other?
Yeah. I don't know if I can talk about effectively, but the species communicate, within a species. So individuals within a population of a species, they communicate with other species, other interspecies communication, like between, like I started with birch, fir, and cedar in my early experiments, and found that they do, they communicate with each other. And really, how effective is it? It's a different kind of communication. I look at how resources move around. So resources being carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus and water, and then these information signals like relatedness and health and sickness. And this goes on between species, within species. How effective is it? It's just, I wish I could answer that question, so I'm kind of hedging a bit, but I think maybe one thing to think about is that we grow up and we live in communities of many species. Forests are healthy because of their diversity. Societies are healthy because of their diversity. And there are, in a forest, there are many, I could dissect why that works. Like, they occupy different niches. They have different roles in ecosystems. Elder trees have different roles than young trees. Alder trees have different roles than Douglas fir trees. And so having this multiplicity of roles, we actually enhance the productivity of the entire ecosystem. And so these species, because they grow together, live together their entire lives, they've developed these incredible methods of communication that even, like, I don't understand it fully, but it exists, and it helps the health of those environments. It raises the productivity of the entire forest. We know that. So there's something about those communication methods that are highly effective. And I can't say, I can't put a number on it. I know that, if two trees are related, that there's more stuff moving between them than two trees that are unrelated or of different species. I know that, but under certain conditions. But I would say that, we haven't looked at all the conditions and we don't really know. And so from a forest conservation point of view is that when you don't understand the whole thing, you don't throw away the relationships and the parts, you actually protect them and conserve them and nourish them so that they continue to be healthy. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, I hope this question won't be offensive. You've already influenced filmmakers by your work, and I understand Amy Adams is set to be you in an upcoming film. I'm pretty sure it's unusual for scientists to be so intriguing to Hollywood. So I have got to ask, what do you think it is besides your intelligence and good looks that people are most intrigued by?
I think it's the story. I think it's that we hunger for understanding these relationships, that we can see our natural world collapsing around us, and we're grief-stricken over this, and we're desperate to fix the problem. I mean, or at least most of us, I think, are. They did a survey of, who thinks we should protect old growth forests in Canada, and 92% of the people put their hands up and said, I do. And so, pretty much everybody's got that common goal. And so people are looking for solutions. And I think Amy Adams and Jake Gyllenhaal, they read that book and they said, holy, this connects us on so many different levels. And the story is fun and intriguing. And so I think that's it. It just appealed to their hearts, right? As people, as citizens of the world. Like Amy Adams she's as beautiful a person as all of us, and grew up in this great big family, and was the middle child and had all of her struggles too. And I think she sees in this raw, real story that we can all relate to. That's why I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that just warms my heart to hear that, because when I read it, I was mostly drawn to the interconnectedness aspect because of the parallels to so many various aspects of life, and that yearning to want to be connected to nature, to the universe, to each other. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Tell us about your Mother Tree project and how we can support you.
Yeah, well, thank you. So the Mother Tree project it's the biggest project I've ever done. It's basically taking everything I've learned about relationships between trees and plants and all the other creatures in the forest, and saying, how can we protect these relationships? Because we know they're the foundation of a beautiful, productive, complex forest, a diverse forest. And so, but we also know that those relationships and our forests are threatened by climate change. Our forests are under extreme stress, not just from fire, but drought and insect outbreaks. We're losing forests really rapidly. And the velocity of climate change is so much faster than trees can deal with. They can't adapt that fast. They can't pick up their suitcases and run north or uphill. So the project, the idea is, how can we still, get value or values or protect or support our livelihoods? We still need wood. We still need food from the forest. How can we still do that and protect these old trees, which we know are the linchpins to the forest? And so across this huge climate gradient that runs 900 kilometers from the border with the US all the way to northern British Columbia, where we have 24 forests where we've saved mother trees in different configurations, and then and compared that to clear cutting or leaving forests intact. And then we've migrated species into them as we need to do. We need to assist the migration of species. And we've figured out things that leaving old mother trees really helps these new seedlings that have come from warmer climates to survive. And as we do this, like as we help plants move, as climate changes, we need all hands on deck. And those hands include those old mother trees. And so we're finding out this incredible stuff. The other thing that we're finding out is that when we clear cut forests, we're losing not just the above ground part of the forest, but a lot of the below ground gold, that's where the stable carbon is. We're actually losing a high proportion of that through sloppy logging practices, through using too many machines. So the Mother Tree Project is generating incredible results. It always needs resources. We would like to expand the Mother Tree Project idea around the world to test this in different kinds of forests, like Amazonian forests or the Douglas fir forests of the southern US. And people can support it by donating to the project. And there's actually at UBC, we've set up a donation page for the Mother Tree Project. I think if you go onto mothertreeproject.org, you'll find the link to that donation page.
Okay, and I'll include that in the resources when I send out an email to everyone. We're running short on time, but I do want to hear about what's next for your research.
Well, I've so focused on this Mother Tree Project, and I have lots of new grad students coming in to look at different aspects of how the fungal community is affected, the plant community, and so on. So I'm going to continue to put a lot of effort into that, and then grow this project so that so here's a good example. All of this big climate gradient that's the size of Denmark, that where we've got this experiment, is in interior forests. Coastal forests are so much different. They're more productive. They're more carbon and biodiversity hotspots. And there's a lot more First Nations or Aboriginal people living in those forests. And so my vision is to create an ancient forest network that includes the Aboriginal people to look after their own forests, but using these principles that are actually their own, understandings, as well as using Western science to save these forests and help the people, give them agency again that they always had until they lost it with colonization, to return that, restore that to the people so they can manage these forests for increasing their productivity, which we know works really well. So re-engaging people with their forests
That's fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. So inspiring. Okay, so I'm gonna transition now and ask you a few questions that people have written in the chat area. And I love it that we have a retired logger online, and he wants to know about natural seeding, plant succession versus monospecies planting. Mm-hmm. And we don't have much time, so maybe you can summarize really fast.
Yeah, most of our forests are quite diverse, and natural regeneration or natural seeding promotes that diversity. Whereas planting, we tend to plant one or two species and they dominate right away the communities and change those plant communities. And they're actually less resilient to drought than a naturally regenerated forest. We've figured that out already. And so I think moving more towards natural regeneration, and you need seed sources, so leaving old trees. And then if you have to, supplement that natural regen with planting, then that's okay, but not to exclude natural regeneration, which we've tended to do.
Thank you. What effect is kudzu, and I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, having on destruction of trees?
I don't know what kudzu is.
Okay, never mind. What is the name of your film that is coming out with Amy Adams, and when?
I don't know. Something about Mother Tree. We haven't got a title. When is it coming out? I think that we almost have a director now, which is a huge step forward. And I actually have a call in with to find that out, if that's been solidified. So that's a major step forward. Once the director is nailed down, then the screenplay will be written, and I think it'll come out in a year or two. That's my feeling, without really knowing for sure.
So exciting. Okay, can any fertilizer, nettle juice, etc., promote the health of the trees? And what would be the application?
Yeah, I think that, providing nutrients and water and support for those trees, that's exactly what mother trees do. And we can do that too as humans. Like, we can interact with these trees and help them along. And so adding a bit of nutrient to the substrate, the soil, is great. You don't want to add so much that they slough off their mycorrhizas, because they will if they're too enriched with, external sources. So we want them to be self-resilient and encourage that, but adding a little bit of fertilizer to get them going is just fine.
Thank you. Okay, before we wrap up, we've been doing this thing on Revel 11 where we do a quick rapid fire. And so I would love to do this with you. Are you ready?
I think so.
Don't be nervous. What is your favorite daily ritual you can't live without?
Walking in the forest.
Oh,
Well, that's
I
so
love that.
predictable, but it's true.
What is your favorite forest to spend time in then?
Well, the one outside my door, which is a ponderosa pine Douglas fir forest with bears in it.
Oh, I love it. What are you currently reading?
Oh, and I've got it right here. It's called Hacking Darwin. You know, genetic engineering in the future for humanity. I'm reading it with one eye going, I don't know, but it's very fascinating about how we know so much about genetic manipulation that we could actually engineer our own future. And honestly, my answer to that is I don't know if that's the future I want to live in, but we are on the cusp of being able to do that, at least in humans. I would say in the natural world, we're a long ways away from that. You know, people who write books like this really are focused on the human side.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the resources list, and maybe we should put that as a topic for Revel 11. Okay, what is something that you revel in?
What I revel in, my children, my students, walking in the forest, making new discoveries, writing a nice passage.
I love it. And then last question is, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Don't be afraid, speak up.
Oh, that is such a good one. Mine is probably patience really is a virtue. Well, this has been such a joy, Suzanne. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're so honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. These are great questions. Nice conversation.
Thank you. And again, everyone, we will send out a list of resources to you in the follow-up. And Joni, do you mind if I hand this off to you to go through Revel 11's upcoming events?
Sure, absolutely, Suzanne. Thank you so much. It's just such a reminder to know that we're all connected in so many ways. So thank you. This has been such a gift this morning. Wow.